Hi, this is Todd from One Shot API. I'm going to quickly show you how to use webhooks with your transaction endpoints today. So let's start by going to oneshotapi.com. We'll go to the documentation, transaction configuration, webhooks, and there's some good detailed information in here on how webhooks work, particularly how webhook signatures work. This is how we do authentication of payloads and prevent replay attacks. So One Shot API uses ED25519 for our signature scheme. And there's a little example here on how that signature verification would look in Python. But I've already got here a complete GitHub repository for you with all of this implemented, and it uses ngrok as a tunneling service so that you can generate a public URL for One Shot API to hit, and you can see the complete life cycle of webhook callbacks. So let's copy this GitHub repository, clone it to our local. Should look like this. There's really only two files that we need to open. One is the README because it has some helpful commands that we can copy and paste into our terminal. And the other one, if you go into the source/Python directory, there's a main.py. This is our fast API implementation, and it has a helper class in here called Webhook Authenticator that we will use for verification. We'll need to input our webhook public key once we've generated it in a couple minutes. So to get started with bringing the stack up, let's first create a free account in ngrok. So we just open the ngrok website, log in. We need to grab our ngrok token. Keep that safe. Don't commit it to your GitHub repositories or people will use it against your account. Let's paste that into README in step one. Let's just paste that into the ngrok token there, copy this, and let's bring up our Docker stack. So when you do that, you should have two services running. You should have one called Fast API and one called ngrok. And for convenience, we will just track the logs of the Fast API server. So we'll keep that running so we can refer back to it later. Next, we'll need to grab the endpoint that was generated for us by the tunneling agent. So if we go to endpoints and look for the first one that comes up, this URL here is what we're going to use in the One Shot API dashboard. So if we take a look at this, if we check the health check endpoint, health check-python, we should see webhook syncers up. That tells us our stack is running normally. And then we will go to localhost 4040. This is the agent, a direct look at the agent that's running in our Docker stack. So we'll come back to this in a second to see the responses once webhooks start being delivered. Now let's log into the One Shot API dashboard. First thing, make sure that you have an escrow wallet provisioned for the Sepolia network. We're going to be using Sepolia for this demonstration. I've got one that has a little bit of testnet funds in it. So we'll need that before we can create an endpoint. To create an endpoint, we will use a pre-deployed contract that I already have up for you that's mentioned here in the README, right here. We can go ahead and open that in the Etherscan block explorer. We're going to use that in just a second. But let's configure our endpoint now. So this is Sepolia test token minter mints test tokens on the Sepolia testnet. Let's choose our escrow wallet. For the webhook URL, Let's grab this endpoint from the ngrok dashboard, paste it here, and specifically we need the route /python. That's where the authentication endpoint is set up. Let's go next. So our contract address, let's grab this, paste it here. The function we're going to be calling is called mint, lowercase, MINT, takes 2 parameters. The first one is 2, which is an address. The second is an amount, which is a uint. We'll hit create. Great. So here is the function that we just created. Now, we will need to grab the webhook public key. In order to actually verify any callbacks, we need this parameter right here. Let's take it over to our VS Code setup. Let's go to main.py, paste it here on line 38, save, and our fast API server will hot reload. So now we're ready to go. All we have to do is trigger a transaction. So to trigger a transaction, again from the details page, I am going to mint to our escrow wallet just for convenience. Could mint it to any address, but we'll use this address for the demo. Make sure to put that in the to field. And for the amount, we're going to mint 1 token, but we need 18 zeros because our test token has 18 decimal places, so we're going to put 18 zeros. And then we're going to hit execute, and this is going to trigger a transaction on the Sepolia network from this escrow wallet address. Okay, so we hit execute. We can check the progress both over here in the transaction history. Once it is mined, we'll see a green check mark appear next to it. And we will also see a callback in our localhost 4040 dashboard. It may take a few seconds for the transaction to mine, depending on how busy Sepolia is or whatever network you're working on. But once it mines, you will get a callback and you will get a green checkmark status. Okay, and so now you can see we got a post request, which resulted in a 200 OK. If we check the transaction history, you can see our transaction we submitted has a green check mark. If we inspect the payload, the event name that we were notified about was transaction execution success. If there had been a problem with the transaction, we would have gotten a transaction execution failure event. In the data field, we have a bunch of useful information that our application might use. Depending on what we're doing, it returns the transaction receipt from the network, which includes everything that you would get from an RPC provider like Infura, things like the block hash, the transaction hash, logs returned by the execution. And what we checked here in this callback, we used the signature field. The signature field was generated by OneShot, and we checked this signature against this webhook public key, which is what allowed us to know that this was an authentic callback from the OneShot API. Thanks for watching, and look out for more videos from OneShot API.